Imagine a vast and intricate machine with countless gears and levers all working together. That's a simplified way to think about the US government. It's designed to be complex, with checks and balances to prevent any one person or branch from having too much power. At the heart of this system is the Constitution, our nation's guiding document. It outlines the powers of the different branches of government: the legislative branch, which makes the laws; the judicial branch, which interprets the laws; and the executive branch, headed by the president. The president, as head of the executive branch, has a big job, carrying out the laws passed by Congress. But the Constitution also gives the president some unique tools to act independently. One of these tools is the executive order. Think of it like a memo with real power. It allows the president to instruct government officials and agencies on how to implement existing laws or to manage the operations of the federal government. It's a powerful tool, meant to allow the president to act swiftly and decisively, especially in times of crisis. Executive orders aren't unlimited in their scope. They can't be used to create new laws or violate existing ones. Their purpose is to provide guidance within the framework of laws already established by Congress. Over the years, presidents from both political parties have used executive orders to advance their agendas and respond to evolving challenges. Some orders are relatively minor, dealing with internal government procedures. Others have had a significant impact on American life. For example, President Abraham Lincoln used an executive order to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in Confederate territories during the Civil War. President Franklin D. Roosevelt used an executive order to create the Works Progress Administration, a massive employment program during the Great Depression. These examples show how executive orders can be used for both sweeping change and more targeted actions, always within the boundaries set by the Constitution. However, the use of executive orders is not without controversy. Critics argue that they can be a way for presidents to bypass Congress and act unilaterally, potentially upsetting the balance of power. The president's power to issue executive orders comes with great responsibility. It's a tool that can be used for good or ill depending on the intentions of the person wielding it. Executive orders allow for swift action, crucial in emergencies. However, bypassing Congress can lead to a lack of transparency and accountability. The debate centers on how much power should be concentrated in one person. Proponents argue the president needs flexibility to address challenges. Critics worry about potential abuse and lack of diverse representation. Donald Trump's presidency was marked by a number of controversies, and his approach to governing was no exception. Trump embraced executive orders as a primary tool for advancing his agenda. His supporters saw this as strong leadership, while critics viewed it as a dangerous expansion of presidential power. These debates played out in the media, in courtrooms, and in living rooms across the nation. Donald Trump entered the White House with a clear set of promises to his supporters. These promises, often delivered with his signature bluntness, resonated with a segment of the American population who felt unheard and underserved by the political establishment. Trump's campaign rhetoric emphasized themes of economic nationalism, a hard line on immigration, and a return to what he described as American strength on the global stage. These themes were not merely campaign slogans. They formed the bedrock of Trump's policy agenda. Within days of his inauguration, Trump began signing executive orders aimed at translating his campaign promises into concrete actions. This flurry of activity signaled a breakneck pace for his administration, one that would come to characterize his approach to governing throughout his presidency. Trump's use of executive orders was particularly notable in areas where he faced resistance from Congress. On issues like healthcare and immigration, where legislative gridlock had stymied progress for years, Trump saw executive action as a way to circumvent the legislative process and deliver on his promises to his base. This approach, while appealing to his supporters, raised concerns among critics who saw it as an overreach of executive power. The stage was set for a clash between the executive and legislative branches, a battle that would play out repeatedly throughout Trump's presidency. His assertive use of executive orders, coupled with his disdain for compromise and his willingness to challenge long-held norms, created a climate of uncertainty and volatility in Washington, D.C. The nation watched as the boundaries of presidential power were tested and redefined. Section 2. The Commander-in-Chief Executive Orders and National Security. The President, as Commander-in-Chief, holds significant power in national defense and foreign policy. Executive orders enable swift action to address threats and advance security interests. Donald Trump frequently used executive orders for national security, including the controversial travel ban. His approach often prioritized perceived threats, sparking legal challenges and protests. The travel ban set the tone for Trump's national security strategy. His administration favored unilateral action, often disregarding diplomatic sensitivities. Section 3. Immigration and the border, a controversial stance. Few issues animated Donald Trump's presidency as much as immigration. Central to Trump's agenda was reducing both legal and illegal immigration. Executive orders became a favored tool for Trump to enact his immigration policies. One order aimed to restrict federal funding to sanctuary cities. Another order directed a zero-tolerance policy for illegal border crossings. This resulted in the separation of thousands of migrant children, sparking national outcry. Section 4. The power of the pen versus the gavel, executive orders, and congressional pushback. Donald Trump's executive orders faced fierce resistance from Congress, sparking a power struggle between the branches. Democrats saw his actions as a threat to their authority and balance of power. Congress used budget control to counter Trump's initiatives. This was challenging, especially on national security issues. Congress also filed lawsuits against Trump's orders. States and advocacy groups joined these legal challenges. Courts played a key role in defining executive power limits. The struggle highlighted the tension between government branches. Trump's presidency tested the checks and balances of the Constitution. Few promises resonated with Donald Trump's base as powerfully as his vow to build a big, beautiful wall along the US-Mexico border. From the moment he descended the escalator at Trump Tower to announce his candidacy, the wall became a potent symbol of his hardline stance on immigration, a rallying cry for those who felt that America's borders were too porous and its immigration system too lenient. Trump's promise to build the wall, however, faced immediate obstacles. Congress, tasked with appropriating funds for such a massive infrastructure project, balked at the estimated cost, which ran into the billions of dollars. Undeterred, Trump turned to executive action, signing an order in January 2017 directing the Department of Homeland Security to begin planning and constructing the wall. The wall's construction became mired in controversy from the outset. Environmental groups filed lawsuits challenging the project's environmental impact, arguing that it would irreparably harm delicate ecosystems along the border. Landowners, many of whom had lived along the border for generations, resisted the government's attempts to seize their property through eminent domain. The wall's construction also faced funding hurdles. When Congress refused to allocate the full amount requested by the Trump administration, the president declared a national emergency, diverting billions of dollars from military construction projects to fund the wall. This move, unprecedented in its scope, sparked a constitutional crisis, with critics arguing that Trump had overstepped his authority and undermined the separation of powers. Just days after taking office, Donald Trump signed an executive order that would come to define his presidency as much as any other, the so-called Muslim ban. This order, issued with little warning and even less clarity, barred citizens from 7 Muslim-majority countries from entering the United States, throwing airports across the country into chaos and sparking protests in cities around the world. Civil rights groups, legal scholars, and even some members of Trump's own party denounced the order as discriminatory and unconstitutional. Protests erupted at airports across the country as travelers from the affected countries found themselves detained, interrogated, and ultimately turned away. The legal challenges to the Muslim ban were swift and relentless. The American Civil Liberties Union, representing several individuals affected by the ban, filed a lawsuit arguing that the order violated the Constitution's guarantee of religious freedom. Other lawsuits filed by states and advocacy groups challenged the ban on similar grounds, arguing that it was motivated by religious animus rather than legitimate national security concerns. The legal battle over the Muslim ban made its way through the courts, with lower courts blocking its implementation and the Trump administration appealing those rulings. The case eventually reached the Supreme Court, which, in a 5-4 decision, upheld a revised version of the ban. The court's ruling, while a victory for the Trump administration, did little to quell the controversy surrounding the ban. The ban continued to be seen by many as a stain on America's reputation as a nation welcoming to immigrants and refugees. Donald Trump campaigned on a promise to shake up Washington and revitalize the American economy. Central to this agenda were slashing taxes and rolling back regulations. These policies drew sharp criticism from Democrats and progressive groups. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 delivered sweeping tax cuts. The law lowered the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. Trump hailed it as a Christmas miracle for economic growth. On the regulatory front, Trump dismantled what he saw as overreaching regulations. His administration rolled back regulations in environmental protection, financial services, and labor rights. Business groups cheered, arguing it would boost competitiveness. Critics argued it put corporate profits ahead of public health and safety. They pointed to weakened environmental regulations and undermined consumer protections. Section 4. Environmental Deregulation, Igniting a Firestorm. Donald Trump's skepticism of climate change was no secret. He had long dismissed it as a hoax, and vowed to undo the Obama administration's environmental legacy, which he viewed as harmful to American businesses and energy independence. True to his word, Trump, upon taking office, launched a systematic assault on environmental protections, rolling back regulations, withdrawing from international agreements, and promoting fossil fuel development. One of Trump's most consequential environmental actions was his decision to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement, a landmark international accord aimed at curbing greenhouse gas emissions. The agreement, signed by nearly 200 countries, reflected a global consensus on the need to address climate change, and Trump's decision to abandon it drew widespread condemnation from world leaders and environmental groups. Beyond the Paris Agreement, the Trump administration systematically targeted environmental regulations across a range of sectors. The Environmental Protection Agency, under Trump's appointee Scott Pruitt, weakened rules limiting air and water pollution from power plants, relaxed fuel efficiency standards for cars and trucks, and opened up vast swaths of public lands and waters to oil and gas drilling. These actions, while celebrated by the fossil fuel industry and its allies in Congress, ignited a firestorm of opposition from environmental groups, public health advocates, and scientists who warned that they would have devastating consequences for the planet. Lawsuits challenging the legality of the Trump administration's environmental rollbacks flooded the courts, setting the stage for a protracted legal battle over the future of America's environmental protections. Section 1. The Border Wall. Legal challenges to funding and land seizures. Trump's border wall faced numerous legal challenges, questioning his authority and funding methods. Environmental groups, landowners, and lawmakers argued Trump overstepped his authority. Trump declared a national emergency to redirect military funds. This move triggered lawsuits, claiming he bypassed Congress. Landowners also challenged the use of eminent domain. The Supreme Court allowed the wall's construction to proceed. Section 2. The Travel Ban. Navigating a labyrinth of legal battles. Trump's travel ban sparked controversy and legal challenges, questioning presidential power and religious discrimination. Lawsuits argued it violated religious freedom and due process. Lower courts blocked the ban, but the Trump administration appealed. The Supreme Court upheld the ban in a 5-4 decision. Critics denounced it as discriminatory, citing Trump's rhetoric. The travel ban left a lasting stain on the U.S. reputation. Trump's deregulatory agenda sparked legal challenges from environmental groups, labor unions, and consumer advocates. They argued his administration sacrificed public health, worker safety, and environmental protections for corporate profits. Courts became battlegrounds, weighing regulatory overreach against potential harms. Environmental and labor protections were hotly contested. The Trump administration faced significant legal setbacks. Trump's hardline stance on immigration reached into America's cities and towns, targeting sanctuary cities. His executive order threatened to withhold federal funding, igniting a legal and political firestorm. Courts issued conflicting rulings, questioning federal power and the 10th Amendment. The Supreme Court left the issue unresolved, highlighting the deep partisan divide over immigration. The legal battles over Trump's border wall were sprawling, winding through multiple courts and levels of the judicial system. Legal challenges questioned its funding, environmental impact, and the government's right to seize private land. A federal judge ruled Trump's attempt to divert military funds was unlawful. Congress had already refused to appropriate the funds requested by the president. The Supreme Court allowed some military funds, but litigation delayed construction. Environmental groups won injunctions halting construction in sensitive areas. They argued the wall would fragment habitats and harm endangered species. Legal challenges slowed progress, navigating environmental regulations and legal hurdles. The battles were about the balance of power and private property rights. The lawsuits reminded that even a president couldn't bulldoze through legal constraints. The Supreme Court's 5-4 ruling upheld Trump's travel ban, affirming presidential authority over immigration and national security. The decision sparked controversy, with dissenting justices highlighting the ban's discriminatory intent. The ruling left a lasting impact on America's global image, fueling debates on Islamophobia and xenophobia. Trump's relentless drive to dismantle regulations faced a formidable obstacle course in the form of the federal judiciary. While the administration celebrated the rollback of numerous regulations, touting them as victories for businesses and the economy, many of these actions were challenged in court, resulting in a mixed bag of wins and losses for the president's deregulatory agenda. Environmental groups in particular were quick to challenge the administration's efforts to weaken environmental protections. They filed a flurry of lawsuits targeting the rollback of Obama-era regulations on air and water pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and energy efficiency standards. These lawsuits argued that the administration had failed to follow proper procedures, ignored scientific evidence, and prioritized corporate interests over public health and the environment. The courts, in many instances, sided with the challengers, issuing injunctions that blocked or delayed the implementation of Trump's deregulatory actions. Judges often found that the administration had failed to provide adequate justification for its actions, had not properly considered the environmental consequences, or had violated procedural requirements. These legal setbacks forced the administration to revisit and revise some of its deregulatory efforts, slowing down its progress and highlighting the limits of executive power. While the Trump administration ultimately succeeded in rolling back a significant number of regulations, its deregulatory push faced consistent and often successful legal challenges. This legal pushback, spearheaded by environmental groups, labor unions, and consumer advocates, demonstrated the critical role of the courts in holding the executive branch accountable and safeguarding public health, worker safety, and the environment. The battle over sanctuary cities, a microcosm of the nation's larger immigration debate, became mired in a legal and political quagmire during the Trump era. The administration's attempts to punish sanctuary jurisdictions, which it viewed as obstacles to its immigration enforcement efforts, sparked a flurry of lawsuits and ignited a fierce debate about the balance of power between the federal government and states. The legal challenges to Trump's executive order targeting sanctuary cities, which sought to withhold federal funding from these jurisdictions, produced a patchwork of conflicting rulings from different federal courts. Some judges sided with the administration, upholding the president's broad authority over spending and immigration enforcement. Others, however, blocked the administration's actions, finding that they exceeded the president's authority, violated the 10th Amendment's reservation of powers to the states, or were motivated by an improper purpose. The Supreme Court, in a closely watched case involving sanctuary cities, declined to issue a definitive ruling on the legality of Trump's executive order. Instead, the court sent the case back to a lower court for further consideration, leaving the legal questions unresolved and the issue in limbo. The legal stalemate over sanctuary cities reflected the deep partisan divide over immigration policy and the growing distrust between the federal government and states controlled by Democrats. The Trump administration's attempts to pressure sanctuary cities, while appealing to its base, further inflamed tensions and left the nation grappling with fundamental questions about federalism, immigration enforcement, and the rights of immigrants. Section 1. A presidency tested. The limits of unilateral action. Donald Trump's presidency was marked by a battle between the executive and judicial branches. His use of executive orders faced legal challenges, testing presidential power. The courts upheld the rule of law, limiting executive overreach. The Constitution's checks and balances proved resilient. The judiciary's independence was crucial in this power struggle. Section 2. The courts as arbiters, navigating the separation of powers. The Trump administration's penchant for executive action brought into sharp focus the delicate balance of power between the executive and judicial branches. The courts, tasked with interpreting the law and ensuring that government actions comply with the Constitution, found themselves on the front lines of defending the separation of powers, a cornerstone of American democracy. Trump's use of executive orders, particularly in areas like immigration and environmental policy, raised concerns about whether he was exceeding his constitutional authority and encroaching on the legislative branch's lawmaking role. The courts, in numerous instances, stepped in to rein in what they perceived as executive overreach, blocking or delaying the implementation of Trump's policies while they considered their legality. These legal battles often involved complex questions of statutory interpretation, administrative law, and constitutional principles. Judges were called upon to determine whether the president's actions were authorized by Congress, whether they complied with procedural requirements, and whether they violated individual rights or constitutional protections. Their decisions, often issued in the face of intense political pressure, had far-reaching implications for the scope of presidential power and the balance of power within the federal government. The Trump era underscored the essential role of the judiciary as an independent check on executive power. The court's willingness to scrutinize the president's actions, to demand legal justification, and to hold the administration accountable to the law, even when it meant ruling against the president, proved crucial in safeguarding the separation of powers and upholding the rule of law. Section 3. A nation divided, a system challenged, the enduring impact of the Trump era. The Trump presidency's legal battles reflected deep societal divisions over immigration, national security, and environmental protection. His polarizing rhetoric turned courtrooms into battlegrounds for America's future. Legal challenges highlighted resistance to his agenda and the power of collective action. The Trump era tested the American legal system's resilience and the rule of law. Section 1. The verdict on executive power, a delicate balance reaffirmed. Trump's presidency tested the balance of power between the executive and judicial branches. His use of executive orders thrust the courts into the spotlight. Legal battles served as a stress test of the Constitution's checks and balances. The judiciary stood firm, reinforcing its role in democracy. The courts demanded legal justification, overturning actions exceeding presidential authority. The verdict reaffirmed the balance envisioned by the framers of the Constitution. Section 2. The long shadow of Trump, a more assertive presidency and its aftermath. Donald Trump's presidency, marked by aggressive executive orders and norm-challenging actions, cast a long shadow over American politics. Future presidents must navigate this assertive landscape, balancing decisive action with the rule of law. The Trump era serves as a cautionary tale. Section 3. The Courts and the Future of American Democracy, Guardians of the Rule of Law. The Trump presidency underscored the crucial role of the courts as guardians of the rule of law and defenders of the Constitution's balance of power. The courts served as a bulwark against executive overreach, protecting individual rights and upholding democratic norms. Legal battles from the travel ban to the border wall demonstrated the judiciary's power to hold the executive branch accountable. These cases highlighted the importance of an independent judiciary, free from political influence. The future of American democracy rests on the shoulders of those who serve on the nation's courts.